Doris Lane pulls up to the HOA building like she has every Tuesday for 10 years, but today, her usual parking space is blocked by a shiny black SUV with a laminated HOA reserved sign taped to a cone. Chloe Lane leaned forward from the passenger seat, one brow raised, her half-empty iced coffee resting on her thigh. "Didn't you used to own that spot, Mom?" Doris didn't blink. She reached for the gear shift, eased the Buick into the space one stall over, and murmured, "Still do. Technically." Then she picked up her leather purse, adjusted the strap of her sensible beige shoes, and stepped out into the bright Arizona morning like nothing unusual had happened. The small stucco building across the lot bore a modest sign, Scottsdale Palms HOA Community Room. For 10 years, that sign hadn't changed, and neither had Doris's quiet routine of showing up once a week to review documents, answer a few neighbor questions, or sit in on meetings when needed, not because she had to, but because she cared. The building itself was part of a small complex she had purchased with her late husband decades ago. They'd rented it out to the HOA for a nominal rate when the neighborhood formed. Back then, it was all potlucks and porch chats. Today, something felt different. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cinnamon potpourri. Plastic scarecrows were propped beside a folding table offering cider and napkins. At the center of it all stood a woman in a navy blue pantsuit, her smile stretched too wide, a clipboard clutched against her chest like a badge. She had short, stiff curls, pearl earrings, and the posture of someone who had never actually been in charge, but desperately wanted to be. "Ms. Lane," she chirped, as if Doris were a disruptive student. "I wasn't expecting you so early." Doris glanced around. "It's 8:58. Meeting's at 9, correct?" The woman's smile tightened. "Well, yes. But new protocols are being considered. Streamlining operations. Fresh energy, you know." Chloe stepped beside her mother. "And you are?" "Oh. Karen Dorsey." She offered a hand to Doris, not Chloe. "I'm the acting chair of the HOA. Interim, technically, but we're formalizing that." Doris looked at the offered hand, then politely shook it. "Acting chair? I wasn't aware of any vote." "Oh, it was more of a consensus. Informal, but enthusiastic." Karen withdrew a folded paper from her clipboard, printed in bright autumn colors. "Also, I'm afraid I need to issue this." She held it out delicately. "We've reserved the space in front for board use only. It's part of a new parking initiative." Doris took the notice without a word. Chloe peered over her shoulder. At the top, in Comic Sans font, it read, "Notice of infraction, parking violation." Beneath it, "Unauthorized use of designated HOA space. Fine, $25. Chloe opened her mouth, but Doris touched her elbow gently. "Thank you," she said to Karen. "I'll make a note of it." The woman blinked, caught off guard by the lack of protest. "Of course. Just trying to keep things fair." Doris turned and walked toward the exit without another word. Chloe followed, eyes narrowed. "Fair?" Chloe hissed once they were outside. "What was that?" "Posturing," Doris replied calmly. "New hat. Wants attention." Chloe slid into the car. "Wants a crown, sounds like." Instead of heading home, they crossed the street to Silver Spoon Diner. It was a narrow place with a metal awning and a chalkboard menu out front. Inside, everything smelled of maple syrup and coffee grounds. Sherry, the morning waitress, waved from behind the counter. "Morning, hon. Your usual." "Please," Doris said, settling into a vinyl booth. Chloe sat opposite her, still visibly stewing. She seriously thinks she can issue parking tickets now? She can print things. That doesn't make them real. Chloe's brows drew together. "And that's your plan? Ignore her? For now." A moment later, Mr. Halter, who had once served as HOA treasurer back when minutes were handwritten and potlucks happened in actual backyards, slid into the next booth with a creak. "Morning, ladies," he said, lifting his cap. Saw your Buick parked out front. Everything all right over there? Chloe leaned forward. Karen gave Mom a ticket. For parking. In her own lot, Doris added. Halter chuckled. Yeah, she's been writing her own rules. Printed up badges last week, too. Had compliance marshal spelled wrong. Chloe shook her head. No one's stopping her. Some don't know any better. Others are just tired. It's easier to nod than argue. Doris buttered her toast. But nodding can become habit. That's when it gets dangerous. When they got back home, Chloe watched her mother walk to the cabinet near the front room. From it, Doris withdrew a slim manila folder labeled Property, HOA Lease, 2007 Present. She carefully slipped the printed violation inside, then fastened the metal prong clips. You're saving that? Chloe asked. I save everything, Doris replied. You never know when someone will forget who owns the table they're trying to flip. That evening, Doris checked her email. Among the grocery coupons and newsletter from the local library sat a subject line in bold. Action required, $25 infraction fee, parking. She clicked it open, read it once, then clicked print. The printer in the hallway whirred to life. She folded the page slowly, placed it in her leather folder, and returned to the porch, where Moose was already waiting. The elderly golden retriever opened one eye, thumped his tail, and nestled back into the woven rug. Doris folded herself into the rocker beside him, teacup in hand, the air warm on her cheeks. Doris folds the email, places it in a file folder marked, Records, October. Karen walks the sidewalk wearing a blue blazer with a stitched-on HOA patch, clearly homemade, clipboard in hand, inspecting non-compliant decor. Behind the curtain in the front window, Doris Lane quietly sipped her tea and watched the scene unfold. The blazer alone might have been humorous on another day, but today, it was paired with Karen's air of absolute authority and the firm clack of sensible heels on concrete. Please tell me she's not in charge, Chloe muttered from the armchair, legs tucked under her as she scrolled on her laptop. Doris didn't answer right away. She kept watching as Karen paused in front of the Delgado's house and scribbled something furiously onto her clipboard. Not officially, she finally said. But official and loud aren't always the same. Halloween decorations had begun appearing earlier in the week, plastic skeletons, inflatable pumpkins, a delightful Frankenstein made entirely of recycled bottles by the McCarthy's grandkids. The neighborhood usually embraced the season with quiet, joyful enthusiasm. This year, however, there was tension threading through even the friendliest displays. The tension took the form of an email that arrived that morning, subject line. Autumn aesthetic expectations, enforced by HOA oversight. It contained guidelines, unusual ones. No more than 3 pumpkins per yard. Hay bales discouraged. Inflatables must be approved by committee. No one had ever heard of this committee. Doris received a printed notice later that afternoon, taped crookedly to her front gate. Decor violation, wreath exceeds seasonal color harmony. The wreath in question was an arrangement of faux leaves and berries, hung on her door every October since 2005. Apparently we've entered an era where burnt orange is a threat, Doris said dryly, handing the paper to Chloe. Karen's campaign continued across the street, where she paused in front of Mr. Santos's flag display. A proud Vietnam veteran, he kept a small American flag beside a carved wooden eagle on his porch. Karen circled it on her clipboard, shaking her head. Later that evening, Doris walked down to the mailbox and noticed a new flyer posted on the HOA board beside the usual community announcements and dog-walking etiquette reminders. The flyer was printed in red ink, bordered with harvest clip art and titled, New Community Quiet Hours, effective immediately. Weekdays, 7 p.m. Weekends, 8 p.m. At the bottom, in bold. Violations may result in decor suspension or community review. Doris returned home and told Chloe, who was now knee-deep in a PDF version of the HOA's original charter, downloaded from a dusty corner of the city website. There's nothing in here about seasonal decor, quiet hours, or anything that sounds like a decor suspension, Chloe said. Karen's making this up. She's counting on people not checking, Doris replied. Later that week, the usual hum of Thursday evening settled in. The book club began gathering in Doris's living room, 7 women in their 60s and 70s, each with a well-worn copy of the month's title and a plate of oatmeal cookies. Conversation flowed from character arcs to garden tips to the rising oddness of HOA communications. I got fined for my porch swing, Mrs. Ruth said between sips of chamomile tea. Said it creaked too loud. Harold built that swing with his own hands in 1973. It's never creaked. She find a swing? Chloe asked, incredulous. She suggested I replace it with something compliance approved, Ruth replied. I asked for a list. She said it was under review. By the end of the evening, they were swapping printouts like trading cards. Notices, warnings, mysterious memos with no signatures. One even bore a rubber-stamped seal that looked suspiciously like it had been lifted from a clipart website. Doris tucked a few into her leather folder, the one growing steadily thicker each week. The following afternoon, a handful of residents gathered outside near the mailbox cluster. Karen stood at the center, clipboard raised like a podium. We must maintain cohesion, she declared, voice clear in the dry desert air. This is a new HOA. We are not bound by outdated assumptions. Some residents just think history gives them rights. But this is a new HOA. Most folks shuffled their feet or stared at the sidewalk. A few nodded uneasily. Doris watched from a distance, arms crossed, saying nothing. That night, as Chloe closed the front blinds, she caught a flash of movement. Karen was across the street, bent low to the pavement, yardstick in hand, slowly measuring the edge of their sidewalk slab by slab. That night, Chloe sees Karen measuring their sidewalk with a yardstick. While organizing old files, Chloe finds a signed lease agreement from 2007. The HOA's office space? Still under Doris's name. She held it up, blinking, then turned toward the kitchen where Doris was dusting off an old pie dish. Mom? Did you know you technically still own the building the HOA meets in? Doris didn't even look up. Of course I do. Chloe paused. And you never mentioned that, why? Because it didn't used to matter. They paid on time, followed the rules, and didn't block my parking spot with laminated signs. Chloe carried the lease into Doris's home office and set it carefully on the desk. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old library books. Shelves lined the walls, each organized by topic. In the corner stood an accordion file drawer Doris had used for decades, its contents so neatly labeled they could have belonged in a museum. Clause 6b, Chloe read aloud, scanning the bottom third of the lease. Owner may terminate lease with 15-day notice for misuse of premises. I mean, this is gold. Use it wisely, Doris said, stepping into the room. Gold is heavier than it looks. That same afternoon, a new email arrived from Karen's official HOA account. It was brightly formatted, complete with autumn leaves in the margins and a headline that read, Holiday Decor Approval Policy, Community Harmony Edition. The body of the email explained that all exterior holiday decorations, lights, wreaths, yard items, and any emotionally charged symbols, would require pre-approval via the newly created Holiday Display Subcommittee. Applications were to be submitted in triplicate by the end of the week. Chloe stared at the screen. She wants us to apply for permission to hang a wreath? Apparently, Doris said, pouring herself another cup of tea. Harmony, you know. The great American threat. By sunset, Chloe was typing rapidly, drafting a formal notice to the HOA's Gmail account with a subject line that simply read, Premises use and Clause 6b, lease review pending. She included the scanned lease, highlighted the misuse clause, and attached 3 photos of Karen's printed violation notices tacked to other people's mailboxes. The next evening, Doris hosted her weekly book club, this time serving spice cake and hot cider. The air was crisp, and the front windows glowed with pumpkin lights, non-compliant, probably, but comforting nonetheless. Mrs. Ruth brought with her a copy of the decor permit form she'd found on her porch that morning. It says we have to measure how far our inflatable turkey extends from the front stoop, she said, passing it around the circle. "Next week she'll want to inspect our stuffing." Laughter rippled around the room, but it was a tired sort of laughter, the kind that echoed too close to truth. Doris said nothing, only nodded and made a mental note to add the form to her growing folder. After everyone had left and the cider mugs were rinsed, Doris listened to a voicemail from Mr. Halter. His voice crackled slightly over the line, "I'll speak at the next board meeting, if there even is one. Might as well give people something worth attending." Doris didn't reply immediately. She simply pressed save, then went to her desk and opened the accordion file again. 2 mornings later, a hard knock echoed from the front porch. When Doris opened the door, she found a single paper taped crookedly to the wood frame. The HOA seal, still suspiciously clip-art-like, was stamped at the top. Below it, typed in bold: "Notice of violation, unauthorized seasonal decor. Subject to property inspection and potential citation." Chloe, reading over her shoulder, said, "So, we're being inspected for a leaf garland?" Doris peeled the paper off slowly, folded it into thirds, and tucked it under her arm. She crossed the room, stepped into her home office, and opened a second drawer in the file cabinet. From it, she removed a folder stamped neatly in all caps. "Lease terms, enforcement ready." Doris smiles, walks to her office, and pulls out a second folder, "Lease terms, enforcement ready." A small American flag and 2 plastic pumpkins in Mr. Santos's yard trigger a full-page HOA violation notice with red borders and the subject line, "Community Compliance Breach." Doris saw it fluttering from the mailbox as she passed with Moose. The notice had been taped there hastily, one corner already curling from the sun. It was the kind of paper that looked official only from a distance: bold font, lots of uppercase, and 2 inexplicably aggressive exclamation marks after "non-compliant material." She paused to read it. Mr. Santos's front porch sat just beyond a short path lined with stones he'd painted with his grandchildren years ago. The little pumpkins, one orange, one white, rested beside a small garden flag that read, "Welcome, friends." She knocked lightly. The door creaked open a moment later, and there stood Mr. Santos, pressed shirt tucked into belted jeans, eyebrows furrowed behind thick glasses. "You saw?" he asked. "I did," Doris replied. "Seems fall decor has become a security risk. They said the pumpkins were a trip hazard. And that the flag wasn't authorized." Doris looked past him to the porch. "The pumpkins haven't moved since last year." He exhaled, rubbing his chin. "I've lived here 28 years. Fought in 2 wars. But apparently 2 gourds and a flag are too much." That evening, as the Arizona sun melted into a wash of gold across the sidewalks, Doris and Chloe prepared for their Thursday book club. The scent of cinnamon rolls warmed the kitchen. Chloe set out napkins printed with tiny turkeys while Doris arranged chairs in the living room. The group trickled in one by one, Mrs. Ruth with her usual lemon tea, Mr. Halter with a folder tucked under his arm, and 2 newer neighbors clutching identical violation forms. "What's next?" Mrs. Ruth muttered. "Fines for blinking too loud." Doris handed her a warm roll. "Only if you do it during quiet hours." Karen's newest announcement had landed in inboxes that morning. It introduced a noise forecast system, complete with charts estimating peak decibel periods, and outlined the approved color zones for lawn decor. Apparently, autumn colors were now to be muted, neutral, and respectful of desert tone harmony. "She's using words like a paintbrush," Chloe said, passing around printed copies of the HOA charter. "None of this is in here." Mr. Halter opened his folder. "I found this in the community center bulletin case." He laid out a new flyer titled, "Restoring Quiet Order, a Community Initiative." In small print, distributed under the authority of the interim compliance chair. Doris tapped the bottom corner. "I never gave permission for that case to be altered." "She's acting like the space is hers," Mrs. Ruth said. "Rearranged the mail slots. Took down the quilt we donated." "The lease," Chloe said quietly. "She's in violation, again." The group went silent for a moment. Outside, the wind rustled a dry palm frond. Doris looked down at her cinnamon roll, then back up at the room. Then it's time we start treating this like more than a nuisance. Later that night, long after everyone had left and the last dish had been rinsed and dried, Doris heard the knock. Not loud. Not repeated. Just a single, firm rap on the front door. She opened it to find no one standing there. Only a plain manila envelope resting against the welcome mat. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper read. Notice to vacate, 30 days. The HOA board has determined that your presence is disruptive to ongoing community harmony and compliance enforcement. There was no signature. Chloe, reading over her shoulder, frowned. Disruptive? Apparently caring about pumpkins and lease clauses is now radical, Doris said dryly. The next morning, she arrived early at the HOA building. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. She walked to the glass bulletin board out front, opened it with a small brass key, and, with calm precision, pinned the eviction notice underneath the original lease agreement. Then she added a handwritten sticky note in bold, clear print. Lease ends when I say so. Chloe mails a certified letter to the HOA board, notice of lease review under Clause 6B, misuse of premises. She stood in line at the Scottsdale post office with her hair pulled into a half knot and the envelope tucked tightly under her arm. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and wintergreen mints. When she reached the front, she asked for tracking, signature confirmation, and a duplicate receipt. Behind the counter, the clerk didn't blink. HOA stuff? Is it that obvious? He smiled. You're the third today. Back home, Doris had spread every copy of the lease across the kitchen table like she was solving a puzzle. Highlighted clauses, margin notes in her late husband's tidy handwriting, and a well-worn spiral-bound HOA meeting notebook all lay neatly in rows. Clause 6B was circled twice. Misuse of premises, including but not limited to unauthorized policy dissemination, structural changes, or misrepresentation of governing authority, constitutes grounds for termination of lease with 15-day notice. Mr. Halter had stopped by earlier that morning with a memory. Your husband, he said, voice low over his cane. He added that clause the year the garden group wanted to install a koi pond without a vote. He told me, it's not for them. It's for the next one who thinks they own the place. Doris hadn't replied then. She only placed her hand over the document and nodded once. Across the street, Karen's yard had become a fortress of posture. 3 surveillance cameras were now mounted at odd angles, one facing the street, one toward the community center, and one inexplicably pointed at Mr. Santos's mailbox. Chloe had documented them all, along with screen captures of recent emails. Karen's latest blast had arrived that morning. Clarification on falsehoods, community reminder. Legacy residents have circulated misleading claims regarding administrative authority and leasing rights. These claims are unfounded and undermine unity. At the bottom, her signature read, Acting Chair, Enforcement Committee, Provisional HOA Lead. You can't just stack titles like business cards, Chloe muttered, filing the message into her growing folder labeled Evidence, 6B Case. By noon, Doris had called an old friend, a retired paralegal who now spent most of his days restoring antique radios. Over coffee on the patio, he flipped through the lease and offered quiet affirmations. She's way out of bounds, he said finally. You've got her on misuse, probable impersonation of authority, and at least 3 counts of unsanctioned public policy postings. Chloe had already begun assembling a timeline. One column showed Karen's activities, flyers, emails, pop-up meetings. Another listed HOA bylaws. The third? Lease infractions. It's not flashy, she said. But it's solid. That evening, just before sunset, a plain manila envelope was slid under their front door. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was strangely neat. Inside, a small flash drive and a sticky note with just 2 words, for her. They plugged it into Doris's laptop and opened the single folder. HOA_finances_2023.xlsx. The spreadsheet was basic but damning. Row after row detailed expenses. Decor compliance signage, $1,312.87. Surveillance upgrade, $689.40. Command center refreshments, $178.90. All listed under a category marked HOA Executive Discretion. She's using collected dues for this? Chloe asked, blinking. On snacks? Doris didn't reply. She printed the spreadsheet, clipped it to the lease termination notice, and tucked both into a leather portfolio. The next morning, she walked to the community center alone. The lobby was empty save for a potted plant and 2 stacked boxes of laminated flyers. She opened the announcement case, removed Karen's latest quiet order memo, and replaced it with a single sheet. Notice of lease termination, effective 15 days from date of posting. Issued under Clause 6B, misuse of premises. All current operations must cease or be formally renegotiated under review. Doris stepped back, adjusted the corners so they lay flat, then turned and walked home as the sun rose fully behind her. That night, as Chloe set down 2 mugs of tea at the diner counter, Doris sipped slowly before saying, "Sometimes you don't need a courtroom. Just a well-lit room and a few facts." A new poster appears overnight, emergency board meeting, mandatory. Sunday, 6 p.m. Final compliance vote. The community center is packed. Folding chairs, off-brand cookies, lukewarm cider, and a palpable silence before the storm. Doris arrived 10 minutes early. Chloe carried the portfolio. Mr. Santos had already taken a front row seat, his posture straight as ever, and a small American flag pin gleaming from his collar. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon air freshener and tense anticipation. At the far end, Karen stood behind the folding table with 2 laminated name placards in front of her, one reading acting chair, compliance oversight. A jug of cider and a stack of mismatched cookies flanked her. She tapped the table twice with her clipboard, as if to silence an invisible orchestra. "We are a family," she began, voice rich with self-importance. "But some refuse to behave like one. Compliance is not optional. Disruption will not be tolerated." Chloe leaned toward Doris. "She thinks she still runs this place." Doris replied without turning her head. "She never did. That's what makes this fun." Karen continued, gesturing to vague piles of flyers and forms. "Certain individuals have chosen chaos. False accusations. Legal threats. I call on this community to return to unity and order." She smiled, expecting silence. What followed instead was Doris rising slowly from her seat and walking to the front, her steps deliberate. "I'd like to speak," Doris said. Karen blinked. "This isn't the open comments portion." Doris opened her folder. "This," she said evenly, "is a copy of the lease agreement signed by the HOA in 2007. The property we're sitting in remains under my ownership." Karen's smile faltered. Doris continued. Clause 6B outlines immediate termination in cases of misuse. Unauthorized signage. Surveillance installations. Financial irregularities. She placed a printed spreadsheet on the table. Exhibit A, $1,300 spent on compliance signage. Without board approval. A rustle moved through the crowd. Doris reached into the folder again. Exhibit B, audio recording. Captured during an open social event. Chloe tapped her phone. From the speakers, Karen's voice rang out clearly. "If they want to host book clubs, they can do it in silence or not at all. Social distractions have no place in structured communities." Gasps followed. Karen stepped back, red rising on her cheeks. "That was taken out of context," she snapped. "I was referring to..." Mr. Halter stood. "There was no election, Karen. No board vote. You printed your own badge and declared yourself." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Mrs. Ruth lifted a hand. "Where's the treasurer's report?" Another voice. "Why were checks made out directly to you?" Karen shuffled her papers. "That's protocol, interim process." Doris gently set down one final page. If the HOA can't follow the rules, she said, they won't have a building to break them in. The room erupted in applause. Not rowdy, respectful, relieved, almost weary. Mr. Santos stood and crossed the aisle to shake Doris's hand. Mrs. Ruth leaned over to Chloe and whispered, "I'll help with the audit. Lord knows someone should have done it months ago." Karen didn't speak again. She grabbed her clipboard, her cider, and turned too sharply. The jug tipped, soaking the plastic tablecloth and half the cookie tray. She left without looking back. Outside, neighbors lingered. Some exchanged numbers. Others hugged. A few simply stood under the porch light, breathing easier for the first time in weeks. Doris waited until the room emptied. Then she collected the papers, packed them carefully, and walked home beside Chloe. Moose met them at the gate, tail wagging slow and steady. The next morning, a red envelope is slid under Doris's door. No return address. Inside, round 2. Soon. The HOA office is dark. A paper sign reads, "Closed pending lease review." But Doris finds a small rock on her front steps, with a red ribbon tied around it. She bent to pick it up, turning it over in her hand. Smooth, ordinary. But the ribbon was the same type Karen had used for her mailbox flyers, cheap polyester, crimson with fraying ends. Chloe stood beside her, arms folded. "You think she left town?" Doris didn't answer right away. The sky overhead was cloudy, the kind of muted Arizona gray that only appeared a few times a year. A breeze rustled through the Palo Verde trees. "Karen's type doesn't leave," she said quietly. "They retreat." It had been 5 days since the meeting. 5 days since Karen vanished. No official resignation. No apology. Just silence, and a paper note taped to the inside of the community center window in shaky lettering. Office closed pending lease review. And yet, little signs remained. Doris placed the ribboned rock on the porch railing and stepped inside, where the kitchen was filled with the scent of cinnamon and sliced apples. A pie crust waited on the counter. Thanksgiving was 3 days away, and she planned to bring dessert to every house on the block, no matter how the last month had gone. Chloe, now more familiar with lease language than she'd ever intended to be, sat at the kitchen table scanning a new anonymous envelope. The contents, a printed HOA policy sheet with every line crossed out in red ink, and new versions scribbled in by hand. She frowned. Who sends passive-aggressive corrections anonymously? Someone who wants to keep playing without rules. Around the neighborhood, signs of restoration had begun. The benches near the community path had been repainted by volunteers. Mr. Santos had built a new birdhouse that stood proudly by his walkway. Kids returned to their bikes, chalk drawings reappeared on sidewalks. But the relief came with a side of unease, like a house too quiet after a storm. Mrs. Ruth stopped by with a stack of ballots for the upcoming interim HOA election. "We're calling it a refounding vote," she said with a smile. Even made little stickers. That night, Chloe noticed a flicker from the direction of the community center. Just a glint, like a motion sensor had triggered inside. She stepped onto the porch and squinted, catching the faint outline of light between the blinds. Too faint to be overhead. Just enough to cast a moving shadow. The next morning, Mr. Halter came by with a mug of coffee and a story. Neighbors said they saw someone on the roof at dawn, he muttered, eyes scanning the street. Said the figure had a scarf. Blue and gray. Chloe turned sharply. Karen's scarf. She disappeared into the den and pulled up their archived doorbell footage from earlier that week. Her fingers danced over the laptop. Fast forward. Pause. Rewind. There, she whispered. The screen showed a faint figure near the community dumpsters, face obscured, hair tied back, scarf trailing. As the figure disappeared, a flicker of glitter caught the light, like someone had brushed past a craft bin. Later that afternoon, behind the building, Mr. Halter found a cardboard box half hidden behind the dumpster. Inside, shredded HOA documents, meeting minutes, policy drafts, violation forms. The edges were dusted and sparkly remnants, and a faint trail of glitter led from the box around the corner, toward the empty townhouse that used to belong to Karen. Doris didn't say much that evening. She baked 2 pies, one for the book club, one for the Ramos family down the block. Moose rested beside the oven, paws twitching in sleep. Quiet justice feels louder than shouting, Chloe said as she tied a ribbon around the last pie box. Doris nodded. It lasts longer, too. The next morning, Doris opened her mailbox and paused. Inside was a single pinecone sprayed silver, with a typed note. Power doesn't expire. Just changes shape. The Thanksgiving potluck goes off without a hitch, until someone notices the bulletin board has a new flyer. Protect the neighborhood. Reinstate order. HOA reclaimed committee. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes, pumpkin spice, and warm cornbread hung thick over the small park picnic area beside the cul-de-sac. Folding tables groaned under casseroles and pies, lawn chairs circled in pockets of shade, laughter drifted freely for the first time in months. Kids raced around with paper pilgrim hats. Mr. Santos handed out little American flags to anyone who wanted one. At the edge of it all, under a modest banner that read "Thankful Together," Chloe lifted her glass of apple cider and clinked it gently against Doris's. See? No loudspeakers. No sign-up sheets. No compliance charts. Just pie and plastic forks, Doris replied, smiling. Mrs. Ruth called the gathering to attention, tapping a spoon on a ceramic dish. We've got something for someone who kept this neighborhood whole while it nearly cracked. From a paper gift bag she pulled a handcrafted wooden plaque. Letters carved unevenly read. Guardian of Common Sense. Below, in smaller script, Thank you, Doris Lane. The applause came soft but steady. Doris stood, cheeks tinged pink, and nodded. You all did this together, she said simply. I just took notes. Chloe stepped up next, holding a folded napkin in both hands like it was a speech. My mom taught me a lot, she began. But this fall, she reminded me of something we forget too often: we don't need louder voices, we need steadier ones. More claps. One cheer. A child dropped a spoon, and everyone laughed. As people returned to their plates, Chloe drifted toward the community board near the picnic tables. It was half covered in quilted leaf patterns and sign-up sheets for a winter coat drive. That's when she saw it. A new flyer. Heavy paper. Typed in bold sans serif font. Protect the neighborhood. Reinstate order. HOA reclaimed committee. She didn't say anything at first. Just pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. A minute later, Doris joined her. She's trying to get in without being seen, Chloe murmured. Doris studied the flyer, her face unreadable. That's the most dangerous way. Back home, the leftovers were packed tight into containers, the porch light turned low. Doris sat in her usual spot beside Moose, rubbing his ears as the wind carried the faint smell of nutmeg and leaves. Karen's old house still sat dark. The blinds hadn't moved in weeks. But sometimes, Chloe said, she thought she saw a flicker of light, like a TV left on just long enough to catch a shadow. That night, as Chloe tucked a throw blanket over her legs and opened her laptop, a message appeared on the screen. Unknown sender, did you enjoy the pie? No context. No emojis. Just black text on a white background. She didn't reply. But she did open the Wi-Fi log. One new device had pinged their router that afternoon, anonymous, masked, and gone within 10 minutes. The next day, the new interim HOA board received its first official complaint. No one could trace it. The email bounced. But someone had noticed. Later that evening, Doris walked alone to the now empty community office. The door creaked when she opened it. Sunlight filtered through dust-flecked blinds. One drawer on the desk sat slightly ajar. She walked to it, pushed it closed, then turned the lock and placed the key in her purse. As she stepped outside, she glanced back once, just long enough to be sure the blinds didn't move. That night, Chloe stirred in bed to the faintest sound, paper rustling. She walked slowly to the front door, heart steady. Opened it to a breath of night air. No one there. Just an index card resting on the welcome mat. On it, in narrow type. Soon. The porch lights were dim again, and the flyers were gone, but the neighborhood carried the echo of what it had reclaimed. It wasn't just about one woman misusing rules, it was about the quiet strength of ordinary people who remembered what fairness looked like. When power is challenged not with anger, but with truth and unity, even the loudest voices lose their grip. Like a steady lantern left glowing on a front step, resolve in the right hands can outlast any shadow. If this story brought back a memory, or sparked a hope, maybe it's time to share it with someone next door.